The colony ship Vorthax Pride hung dead in space, its hull cracked like an eggshell. Emergency lights flickered through the breach where escape pods had launched hours ago. Inside the twisted wreckage of what used to be the nursery section, 5 small forms huddled together in the darkness. Zrak pressed his scaled body against his younger siblings, trying to keep them warm. At barely 8 cycles old, he was the eldest of the Kethvar offspring, but he felt so small now. The fire had come without warning, spreading through their home faster than anyone could react. The acrid smell of melted metal and burned electronics filled his nostrils, making him want to retch. His sister Nyx whimpered softly, her bright orange eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. She was only 4 cycles old, too young to understand why their parents hadn't come back for them. The 3 smallest ones, Tor, Vel, and Little Pix, were barely more than hatchlings. They clung to Zrak's warm belly scales, their tiny claws digging into his hide. The adults had prioritized the nurseries during the evacuation, but their section had been cut off when the main corridor collapsed. Zrak remembered the sound of his mother's voice calling his name, growing fainter as the rescue teams moved away. The emergency blast doors had sealed automatically, trapping them in what was supposed to be the safest part of the ship. Now the air was getting thin. Each breath came harder than the last, and Zrak could feel the cold seeping through the damaged hull. His people were desert dwellers built for heat and dry air. This metal tomb was slowly freezing them to death. A distant rumble made the debris shift around them. Something was moving out there in the void. Zrak lifted his head, straining to hear over his siblings' quiet breathing. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't the familiar hum of Kethvar engines. Through a crack in the twisted bulkhead, he caught a glimpse of lights moving outside. Strange blue-white lights that moved with purpose. His heart hammered against his ribs. Everyone knew the stories about the humans, the bipedal predators who had somehow convinced the Galaxy Council to let them join civilized space. The Kethvar were predators too, but they hunted with honor, with tradition. Humans were different. They were persistence hunters, the kind who would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They had forward-facing eyes and flat teeth that could tear through anything. Most terrifying of all, they smiled when they were happy, baring those terrible teeth like a threat display. But as the lights grew brighter and the rumbling grew louder, Zrak realized something else. The humans were the only species crazy enough to approach a burning wreck this deep in the neutral zone. Everyone else would have written off the survivors and moved on. A new sound reached his ears, metal cutting through metal. The emergency bulkhead that had trapped them was being opened from the outside. Sparks rained down through the gaps in the debris as someone worked to reach them. Zrak gathered his siblings closer, unsure whether rescue or death was coming through that breach. In the stories, humans were either saviors or monsters. There seemed to be no middle ground with their species. The cutting stopped. For a moment, everything was silent except for the soft breathing of the younglings. Then a voice called out, speaking in heavily accented but understandable galactic standard. "Hey, anyone alive in there? We're here to help." The voice was deep and rough, unmistakably human. Zrak's instinct screamed at him to hide, to protect his siblings from the predator outside. But another part of him, the part that was slowly suffocating in the toxic air, whispered that this might be their only chance. He made a decision that would haunt and bless him for the rest of his life. Taking a deep breath of the poisoned air, he called back, "We're here, 5 younglings." "The air is bad." The response was immediate and urgent. More voices joined the first, shouting orders and coordinates. The sound of cutting resumed, faster and more desperate now. Someone was coming for them. As the breach widened and breathable air began to flow in, Zrak caught his first glimpse of human eyes through the gap. They were small and dark, set in a pale face covered with strange fur, but there was something in those predator eyes that he had never expected to see. Compassion. The human smiled, and for the first time in his young life, Zrak wasn't afraid of those gleaming teeth. They looked gentle somehow, warm instead of threatening. The human reached through the gap with a gloved hand. "Come on, little ones. Let's get you out of there." Captain Marcus Chen had seen a lot of terrible things in his 20 years of deep space rescue work, but the sight of 5 terrified alien children huddled in the wreckage hit him harder than he expected. The eldest couldn't be more than a human 10-year-old equivalent, and the smallest ones were practically babies. "Easy there, kids," he said softly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The HFY were predators, but they were also prey to bigger predators in their home system. Quick movements would trigger their flight response, and in a damaged ship, that could be fatal. His team had been tracking the emergency beacon for 6 hours, pushing their rescue ship Good Samaritan to its limits. The HFY colony ship had been attacked by pirates in the neutral zone, far from any official rescue services. By the time they arrived, most of the survivors had already been evacuated by other ships from the convoy. But Marcus's crew never left a beacon unanswered. That was the human way. You kept looking until you found everyone, even when logic said to give up. "Sarah, get the med kit," he called to his second-in-command. "And break out the emergency heaters. These little ones are half frozen." Dr. Sarah Kim was already moving, her medical training kicking in as she assessed the situation. The children's breathing was labored, and their normally vibrant scales had dulled to a sickly gray-green color. Hypothermia and oxygen deprivation were killing them slowly. The eldest child, Zarak, he had said his name was, helped guide his siblings through the breach one by one. Marcus was impressed by the young alien's composure. Even in crisis, he was protecting the others, making sure the smallest ones went first. "You're doing great, Zarak," Marcus said as he lifted the tiniest hatchling into his arms. The little creature was no bigger than a human toddler, with oversized eyes and delicate, translucent scales. "What's this one's name?" "Pix," Zarak replied, his voice shaky but determined. "She's the youngest." The fire started near the adult quarters. "Our parents." His voice trailed off. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd seen too many orphans in his career, but it never got easier. "We'll find them," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The colony ship was breaking apart, and life signs were scarce. The rescue went smoothly after that. Marcus's team was experienced at handling traumatized survivors, and they'd dealt with HFY before. The children were loaded onto the Good Samaritan and rushed to the medical bay, where Dr. Kim immediately began treating them for smoke inhalation and exposure. But as Marcus watched the colony ship finally break apart in their wake, he realized this rescue was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. 5 orphaned children, no relatives in the convoy, and the HFY government was 3 months away by the fastest ship. The refugee processing centers were already overcrowded, and alien children often didn't survive the institutional care systems. "Captain," Sarah said quietly, joining him at the observation port, "I need to talk to you about the children." Marcus turned to face his old friend. They'd served together for 8 years, and he could read the concern in her expression. "How bad is it?" "Physically, they'll recover. But Marcus, they're not just traumatized. They're bonded to each other in a way that goes beyond human family structures. HFY siblings share a psychological link that develops in early childhood. Separating them could cause permanent psychological damage. And keeping them together?" Sarah sighed. "The refugee systems aren't equipped for that. They'll be split up, sent to different processing centers, maybe different worlds. The older ones might survive it, but the little ones—" She shook her head. Marcus stared out at the stars, his mind racing. He'd always been a by-the-book officer, following regulations and procedures. But sometimes the book was wrong. Sometimes the right thing to do was the thing that would get you in trouble with the authorities. "There's another option," he said slowly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The Good Samaritan is registered as a long-term exploration vessel. We've got family quarters, educational facilities, even a hydroponics bay. Legally, we could take on civilian passengers for extended missions." "Marcus, are you suggesting we adopt 5 alien children?" He turned to meet her gaze, his decision crystallizing. "I'm suggesting we give them a home until we can find them a better one." "And if we can't find them a better one?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Taking on alien minors was legally complex, and the bureaucratic nightmare would be immense. But she'd seen what happened to orphaned children in the system. The statistics were depressing. "The crew would have to vote on it," she said finally. "This affects everyone." Marcus nodded. "I'll call a meeting." "But Sarah, these kids have been through enough." "Whatever we decide, we do it fast." An hour later, the entire crew of the Good Samaritan gathered in the main conference room. Marcus laid out the situation plainly, explaining the children's circumstances and the limited options available. He talked about the legal challenges, the resource requirements, and the personal sacrifices it would mean for everyone aboard. When he finished, the room was silent for several long minutes. Then Chief Engineer Rodriguez spoke up. "Captain, I've got nephews back on Earth. Can't imagine them going through what these kids have been through." He paused, looking around at his shipmates. "I say we take them in." One by one, the rest of the crew voiced their agreement. Navigator Chen talked about the unused family quarters that could be converted. Communications Officer Walsh mentioned her teaching certification and how she could handle their education. Even the usually gruff Chief of Security voted yes, though he grumbled about security protocols the whole time. When the vote was finished, it was unanimous. The Good Samaritan had just become a family ship. Marcus felt a weight settle on his shoulders that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. They were really doing this. 23 human adults were about to become responsible for 5 alien children who had lost everything. As he headed back to the medical bay to check on the younglings, Marcus wondered if they had any idea how much their lives were about to change, or how much they were about to change his. 3 weeks into their new life aboard the Good Samaritan, the Kethavar children were still adjusting to human customs. Zrak watched from the doorway as Dr. Kim tried to convince little Pix to eat her breakfast. The tiny hatchling had been refusing solid food for days, surviving only on the nutrient paste they'd synthesized to match Kethavar dietary needs. "Come on, sweetheart," Sarah coaxed, holding out a spoonful of the paste. "You need to eat to grow big and strong." Pix turned her head away, her small body trembling. She hadn't spoken since the rescue, communicating only through chirps and clicks that even her siblings were struggling to understand. The trauma had affected all of them, but Pix seemed to be retreating deeper into herself each day. Zrak stepped into the room, his claws clicking softly on the metal deck. In the past weeks, he'd grown more comfortable around the humans, but he still moved carefully. These beings were so much larger than his people, and their strange customs often confused him. "She misses the feeding songs," he said quietly. "On the ship, the mothers would sing while the younglings ate. It helped them feel safe." Sarah looked up at him with those peculiar small eyes that somehow managed to be so expressive. "Feeding songs? Could you show me?" Zrak hesitated. The feeding songs were sacred to his people, passed down through generations of mothers to their children. But these humans had saved them when no one else would. They deserved trust. He began to hum, a low melodic sound that resonated in his chest. It was a simple tune, one that his own mother had sung to him when he was Pix's age. The melody spoke of safety and warmth, of family and belonging. Pix's head turned immediately at the sound. Her orange eyes brightened and she made a small chirping noise. Zrak continued the song, adding the traditional words in his native language, and Pix opened her mouth for the spoonful of paste. Sarah smiled, those predator teeth somehow managing to look gentle. "That's beautiful, Zrak. Would you teach it to me?" Over the following days, Sarah learned the feeding song, though her human voice couldn't quite match the harmonic resonance of Kethavar vocals. Still, Pix seemed to appreciate the effort and she began eating regularly again. But it was Chief Engineer Rodriguez who made the biggest breakthrough with the children. Miguel had grown up with a large extended family and understood the chaos that came with multiple children in one space. When he found Tor and Vel fighting over a toy in the common area, he didn't separate them like most adults would have. Instead, he sat down on the floor between them, picked up one of their mechanical puzzles, and began taking it apart with practiced ease. The 2 young Kethavar stopped fighting immediately, fascinated by his quick, precise movements. "You want to see how this works?" Miguel asked, his weathered hands gently separating the puzzle components. "It's all about understanding the connections." For the next hour, he showed them how each piece fit together, explaining the principles of mechanical engineering in simple terms. The children hung on his every word, their natural predator curiosity overcoming their trauma. Word of Miguel's success spread quickly through the ship. Soon, other crew members were finding ways to connect with the children. Navigator Chen taught them about stellar cartography using holographic star maps. Communications Officer Walsh introduced them to human literature, reading them adventure stories that translated surprisingly well across species barriers. Even Chief of Security Harrison, despite his grumbling about proper protocols, found himself teaching the older children basic self-defense techniques. He claimed it was for ship security purposes, but everyone saw how gently he worked with them, adapting human martial arts for their different physiology. Captain Marcus watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and amazement. His crew was transforming before his eyes, becoming something more than just a rescue unit. They were becoming a family. But the real test came when they received a transmission from HFY Space. The children's surviving relatives had been located, and the HFY government was demanding their immediate return. According to their laws, human custody of HFY minors was illegal, regardless of the circumstances. Marcus called a family meeting, the first time he'd thought of his crew in those terms. The children sat with the adults in the main conference room. Pix curled up in Sarah's lap while the older ones clustered around Miguel and the others, who had become their surrogate parents. "We have a problem," Marcus began, his voice heavy. He explained the legal situation, the demands from the HFY government, and the timeline for compliance. The children would have to be transferred to a HFY vessel within 2 weeks. Zrak spoke up first, his young voice clear and determined. "We don't want to go." "Zrak," Marcus said gently, "these are your people. They're your family's people. You'll be with others who understand your culture, your traditions." "But you're our family now," Nick said, looking around the room with those bright orange eyes. "You saved us. You take care of us. Why would we want to leave?" The room fell silent. Marcus felt the weight of 23 human hearts breaking simultaneously. They'd all known this day might come, but knowing hadn't made it easier. "Because," Sarah said softly, "sometimes loving someone means letting them go to where they'll be happiest." "We are happiest here," Tor declared with the certainty only a child could muster. Dr. Kim looked around the room, seeing the faces of her crewmates. They'd all grown attached to these children, but more than that, they'd all seen how the children had changed them. The Good Samaritan wasn't just a rescue ship anymore. It was a home. "What if there was another way?" she asked quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The HFY government is demanding the children's return based on their law." "But what about human law? What about the children's own choice?" "Sarah, they're minors. They don't have legal standing to choose. On HFY maybe, but we're in human-controlled space right now. And according to the Refugee Protection Act of 2387, any minor refugee has the right to petition for asylum if returning to their home system would cause psychological trauma." The room buzzed with sudden energy. Marcus felt a spark of hope, followed immediately by caution. "That's a hell of a legal gamble, Sarah. If we lose, we could face charges for kidnapping. And if we don't try," Miguel said quietly, "we lose them anyway." Marcus looked around the room, seeing the determination in every face. His crew, his family, was ready to fight for these children. The question was whether they could win. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what human law has to say about this." The courtroom on Haven Station was packed with beings from a dozen different species, all drawn by news of the unprecedented custody case. Marcus sat at the human delegation table, watching as Zrak took the witness stand with a confidence that belied his young age. The past month of legal preparation had transformed the traumatized child into a surprisingly articulate advocate for his siblings. The HFY delegation, led by clan elder Vorthak himself, radiated disapproval from across the courtroom. Their representative, a sharp-eyed female named Sith-Ara, had been attacking the human position for 3 days, arguing that the children belonged with their own species. Judge Melissa Torres, a veteran of interspecies legal disputes, gestured for Zrak to begin his testimony. The boy had requested to speak for all 5 siblings, a responsibility that would have intimidated most adult humans. "Your Honor," Zrak began, his translator rendering his words in crisp galactic standard, "my siblings and I want to stay with the humans who saved us." "They have become our pack," Sith-Ara immediately objected. "Your Honor, the child is using human terminology. This demonstrates the psychological manipulation these beings have subjected him to." Judge Torres held up a hand. "The child may continue." Zrak's orange eyes blazed as he looked directly at the HFY delegation. "No one manipulated us. We learned human words because humans listened to us. They learned our feeding songs. They taught us to read human stories. Engineer Rodriguez showed us how machines work, like our father used to do." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and Sarah felt her throat tighten. The boy was carrying so much responsibility for someone so young. "The humans didn't try to make us forget we're HFY," Zrak continued. "They helped us remember, Dr. Kim found recordings of our homeworld's music. Captain Marcus taught us about our history, things even our parents never told us. They made us proud of what we are while making us part of what they are. The Kethvar delegation shifted uncomfortably. Marcus knew they'd been arguing that human custody would dilute the children's cultural identity, but Zrak was systematically dismantling that argument. But what about your clan obligations? Sithara demanded. You have duties to your people, responsibilities that cannot be fulfilled while living among aliens. For the first time, Zrak hesitated. Marcus held his breath, knowing this was the crux of the Kethvar legal argument. Clan loyalty was fundamental to their society. Then Zrak straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a wisdom that seemed far older than his years. My first responsibility is to my siblings. Our parents died protecting us. They would want us to be safe and happy. The humans have given us both, and the humans have learned from us too, Nix added from the gallery despite not being called to testify. Judge Torres allowed it, curious to hear from the second eldest child. Communications Officer Walsh learned our language so she could read us stories in Kethvar, Nix continued. Chief Harrison adapted our hunting exercises for shipboard training. We're not just living with humans. We're teaching them about us while they teach us about them. Dr. Kim leaned forward to whisper to Marcus. She's describing cultural exchange, not assimilation. That's going to play well with the judge. The testimony continued for hours. Each of the older children spoke, describing their daily life aboard the Good Samaritan in detail. They talked about lessons with Walsh, engineering projects with Rodriguez, and the elaborate game they'd invented that combined human strategy games with Kethvar hunting tactics. When Little Pix was called forward, the courtroom fell silent. She was still the smallest, still the most fragile, but she climbed onto the witness chair with determination. The translator struggled with her childish pronunciation, but her message was clear. The humans sing to me, she said simply. When I have bad dreams about the fire, Dr. Sarah sings the feeding songs and I feel safe. I want to stay where I feel safe. Even some of the Kethvar delegation looked moved by her testimony. Sithara seemed to realize her position was weakening, because she shifted to a new line of attack. Your Honor, regardless of the children's preferences, human care cannot provide for their specific physiological needs. They require specialized nutrition, environmental controls, and medical care that only Kethvar science can provide. Dr. Kim stood to respond. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence to the contrary. For the next hour, Sarah detailed the comprehensive care protocols they'd developed. She showed holographic displays of the children's medical progress, their educational advancement, and their psychological stability scores. Every metric showed improvement since they'd been in human care. But more importantly, Sarah concluded, we've learned to adapt our care to their needs, just as they've adapted to life with us. That's what families do. They grow and change together. Elder Vorthak finally spoke, his deep voice commanding attention. Dr. Kim, your efforts are commendable, but these children carry the genetic legacy of their clan. They have gifts that will only manifest properly among their own kind. Marcus felt his heart sink. The elder wasn't wrong. Kethvar had unique abilities that often required specific triggering conditions. If the children couldn't develop their full potential in human care, the court might rule against them regardless of emotional bonds. But Zrak surprised everyone by standing up. Elder Vorthak, with respect, my gifts are already manifesting. The courtroom buzzed with sudden interest. Kethvar genetic gifts typically didn't emerge until adolescence, and Zrak was still several years away from that milestone. I can sense the emotional states of my human family, Zrak continued. I know when Chief Harrison is worried about something, even when he's trying to hide it. I can tell when Captain Marcus is proud of us or when Dr. Sarah is sad about something she's reading in her medical journals. Elder Vorthak's eyes widened. Emotional resonance? But that requires a strong pack bond, Zrak finished. The humans aren't just taking care of us. We're bonded to them. Really bonded, the way Kethvar bond to their clan families. The implications hit the courtroom like a shockwave. If the children had truly bonded with the humans at a genetic level, separating them could cause permanent psychological damage. It was the one argument even traditional Kethvar law couldn't ignore. Judge Torres called for a recess, but Marcus could see the decision forming in her expression. They'd done it. They'd actually won. As the court adjourned for deliberation, Marcus felt a small hand slip into his. Pix looked up at him with those enormous orange eyes, completely trusting. "Are we going home now?" she asked. Marcus smiled, realizing that home had never been a place for him. It had always been the people who mattered most. "Yes, little one, we're going home." 2 years after the custody ruling, the Good Samaritan had become something unprecedented in galactic society, a truly integrated mixed-species family unit. The ship itself had been modified to accommodate both human and Kethvar needs, with temperature-controlled zones, specialized recreational areas, and even a small traditional Kethvar hunting ground in the converted cargo bay. Captain Marcus stood on the bridge, watching as 15-year-old Zrak ran the navigation console with the confidence of a veteran spacer. The young Kethvar had grown significantly, his once small frame now approaching adult proportions. His scales had deepened to a rich emerald green, and the emotional resonance gift he'd discovered during the trial had evolved into something remarkable. "Captain," Zrak said without looking up from his console, "Chief Harrison is concerned about something in engineering." His stress levels just spiked. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. Zrak's empathic abilities had made him an invaluable member of the crew, able to sense problems before they became crises. But more than that, his unique perspective as someone who truly belonged to both species had helped them navigate dozens of complicated first-contact situations. The comm system crackled to life. "Bridge, this is Harrison. We've got a problem down here. You better send someone who speaks Kethvar." Marcus smiled. "On our way, Chief." They found Harrison standing in the main engineering section with 12-year-old Nyx, who was somehow wedged inside the ship's primary power coupling. Her smaller size and natural agility made her perfect for accessing tight spaces that would challenge human engineers. "The coupling's been damaged by micrometeorites," Nyx called out, her voice echoing from inside the machinery. "But I can fix it if someone can hand me the quantum resonator." Miguel Rodriguez, now the ship's chief engineer and Nyx's unofficial mentor, grabbed the requested tool. "Coming your way, little mechanic." Nyx's passion for engineering had surprised everyone, including herself. Kethvar females traditionally focused on hunting and leadership roles, but human society had given her the freedom to explore her interests. She'd become the ship's expert on hybrid human Kethvar technology, creating innovations that neither species could have developed alone. "Got it," Nyx called out triumphantly. The power readings on Harrison's console immediately stabilized. She emerged from the coupling covered in lubricant and grinning widely, her teeth gleaming in the artificial light. "Another day. Another miracle," Miguel said, ruffling the crest of scales on her head. "You're going to put me out of a job at this rate." "Never," Nyx replied with the casual confidence of a child who'd grown up surrounded by people who believed in her abilities. "You still have to teach me quantum mechanics." In the ship's educational center, Tor and Vel were engaged in their daily lessons with Communications Officer Walsh. Now 10 and 11 respectively, they'd become the ship's unofficial ambassadors, their natural charisma and multilingual abilities making them perfect for first-contact situations. "Today we're learning about the Zephyrian communication protocols," Walsh explained, projecting a holographic display of the insectoid species they were scheduled to meet next week. "Remember, they communicate primarily through pheromone releases, so we need to be very careful about our scent profiles." Tor raised his hand. "What about their emotional responses to predator species? Should we modify our approach signals?" Walsh smiled. The boy's question demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of interspecies relations that all the children had developed. Growing up as bridges between two cultures had given them insights that most adults never achieved. "Excellent question. Vel, what do you think?" Vel, ever the strategist, considered carefully. "We should probably have Dr. Kim present first since humans are less overtly predatory in appearance. Then introduce us gradually, maybe starting with Pix since she's the smallest and least threatening." It was exactly the right answer, and Walsh felt the familiar pride that came with watching these remarkable children develop their unique talents. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Kim was conducting Pix's monthly evaluation. Now 7 years old, the youngest member of their family had grown into a bright, curious child whose emotional intelligence was off the charts. Her early trauma had left her with an almost supernatural ability to sense when others were in pain, making her an invaluable assistant in medical situations. "How's your empathic range today, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, running her scanner over Pix's small form. I can feel everyone on the ship, Pix replied matter-of-factly. Zrak's happy because he solved the navigation problem. Nyx is proud because she fixed the engine. Captain Marcus is worried about the diplomatic mission, but also excited. And you're thinking about Dr. Reynolds again. Sarah blushed. Dr. James Reynolds was a xenobiologist they'd worked with 6 months ago, and her feelings for him had apparently been more obvious than she'd thought. That's quite a range, Sarah said, deflecting from the personal observation. Your abilities are developing much faster than normal for your age. Zrak says it's because we're bonded to so many different people, Pix explained. The more connections we have, the stronger our gifts become. It was a theory that was gaining support among xenopsychologists. The children weren't just living with humans. They were evolving new capabilities through their unique social environment. That evening, the entire family gathered in the main recreation area for their weekly planning meeting. It had become a tradition, a time when humans and Kethvar alike could voice concerns, share ideas, and make decisions about their collective future. We've got 3 missions on the board, Marcus announced, projecting the options onto the main display. Scientific survey of the Andromeda Nebula, diplomatic escort duty in the Rigel sector, and emergency relief work in the outer colonies. The discussion that followed demonstrated the unique dynamic they'd developed. Human crew members focused on logistics and regulations. The Kethvar children considered emotional and social factors. Together, they created solutions that neither group could have reached alone. I vote for the relief work, Zrak said finally. There are families out there who need help like we needed help. One by one, the others agreed. It wasn't the most profitable mission or the most prestigious, but it was the most human thing to do, and humanity had become a core value for all of them, regardless of species. As the meeting broke up and family members dispersed to their evening activities, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching his unconventional family thrive. They'd created something new in the galaxy, a model for what different species could accomplish when they truly accepted each other as equals. The Good Samaritan was no longer just a rescue ship. It was proof that family wasn't about genetics or species. It was about the bonds you chose to build and the commitment to protect each other no matter what the universe threw at you. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, other mixed families were beginning to form, inspired by the example of 23 humans and 5 Kethvar, who had chosen love over law, understanding over prejudice, and hope over fear. 5 years had passed since the custody battle, and the emergency call from the Outer Rim colonies came at the worst possible time. The Good Samaritan was undergoing scheduled maintenance at Haven Station when the distress signal reached them. A massive solar flare had destroyed the primary settlements on Kepler 442b, leaving thousands of colonists stranded without power, heat, or communication. Captain Marcus stood in the docking bay, watching his crew prepare for emergency departure with practiced efficiency. But this mission would be different. For the first time since the children had joined them, they would be heading into a genuinely dangerous situation. Captain, Zrak approached, now 18 and serving as the ship's official first officer. His adult form was impressive, nearly 7 feet tall with the distinctive ridge patterns that marked him as a natural leader among his people. I've been monitoring the distress frequencies. The situation is worse than the initial reports indicated. Marcus turned to his adopted son, still sometimes amazed by the confident young man Zrak had become. How much worse? The flare didn't just knock out their power grid. It ionized their atmosphere and contaminated their water supply. We're looking at massive radiation exposure across multiple settlements. Without immediate intervention, the death toll could reach the hundreds of thousands. The weight of those numbers settled on Marcus's shoulders. This was exactly the kind of mission the Good Samaritan existed for. But it was also exactly the kind of mission where not everyone came home. Recommendations? He asked. Zrak's expression was grave. We need to move fast, but we also need to be smart about exposure protocols. The radiation levels are going to be dangerous even for us. Dr. Sarah Kim joined them, her medical scanner already in hand. I've been reviewing the atmospheric data. We can work in the contaminated zones for maybe 6 hours at a time before we need to cycle out for decontamination. That's going to make this a very long operation. What about the children? Marcus asked quietly. It was the question everyone had been avoiding. Nyx, now 17 and the ship's chief engineering officer, was essential for any major power restoration work. Tor and Vel, at 15 and 16, had become the ship's premier diplomatic team. And Pix, though only 12, had developed medical intuition that often saved lives. But they were still his children, human and Kethavar alike, and the idea of taking them into a radiation zone made his protective instincts scream. "They're not children anymore, Marcus," Sarah said gently, "and this is what we trained for. All of us." The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Nyx herself, her engineering uniform already equipped with the specialized gear needed for radiation work. "Captain, I've been analyzing the power grid schematics. The damage is extensive, but it's fixable. The problem is, most of the repair work will need to be done manually, in areas too dangerous for remote drones." "Nyx," Marcus began, but she cut him off with a gesture that was pure Kethavar authority. "Dad," she said, using the human term that had become natural for all the children, "I'm the only one on this ship who can fit into those maintenance conduits and survive the radiation long enough to make the repairs. You taught me that with privilege comes responsibility. This is my responsibility." Before Marcus could respond, Tor and Vel appeared, followed closely by Pix. It was clear they'd been coordinating their approach. "The colonists are going to be scared and confused," Tor said without preamble. "They've probably never seen Kethavar before, and in their current state, they might react badly to unknown predators showing up to help them. But if they see us working alongside humans," Vel continued seamlessly, "see that we're part of the same family, it could change their whole perspective on interspecies cooperation." Pix, despite being the youngest, delivered the final argument. "And I can sense radiation sickness before it becomes critical. I can help Dr. Sarah triage patients more effectively than any scanner." Marcus looked around at the faces of his crew, human and Kethavar, biological and chosen family. They were right, and he knew it. This was what they'd trained for, what they'd all committed to when they chose to make the Good Samaritan their home. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this by the book. Full radiation protocols, mandatory rotation cycles, and nobody, and I mean nobody, takes any unnecessary risks." The journey to Kepler 442b took 3 days, during which the crew prepared for what would be one of the most challenging missions of their careers. The children, Marcus still thought of them that way sometimes, threw themselves into the preparation with the intensity of seasoned professionals. Nyx designed specialized repair protocols that would minimize radiation exposure while maximizing efficiency. Tor and Vel developed communication strategies for dealing with traumatized refugees. Pix worked with Sarah to create triage procedures that incorporated her empathic abilities. When they finally arrived at the devastated colony world, the scope of the disaster was breathtaking. The once blue skies had turned a sickly yellow-green from the ionized atmosphere. The main settlement, which had housed nearly 1 million people, was now a maze of damaged buildings and failing emergency shelters. "Jesus," breathed Communications Officer Walsh as the images came through on the main screen. "How many ships are already here?" Marcus asked. "None," Zrak reported grimly. "We're the first responders. The nearest Federation fleet is still 4 days out." Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. 1 million people, and they were the only help available. "All right, people," he announced to the assembled crew. "This is what we do. This is why we're here. Let's show them what humanity looks like when it stands together." As the Good Samaritan entered the planet's atmosphere, Marcus caught sight of Pix standing near the observation window. Despite her youth, she wore the same expression of determined compassion that he'd seen on human faces throughout history, the look of someone who would not stand by while others suffered. It occurred to him then that humanity wasn't just about being human. It was about choosing to help, choosing to risk yourself for others, choosing to see potential family in every stranger you met. And in that moment, watching his mixed-species crew prepare to risk their lives for people they'd never met, Marcus had never been more proud to be part of the human story. The real test was about to begin. 3 months after the Kepler 442b rescue operation, Captain Marcus Chen stood before the Galactic Council Assembly, flanked by his extraordinary family. The rescue had become legend throughout known space, not just because they'd saved nearly 1 million lives, but because of how they'd done it. The images were still fresh in everyone's minds. Nyx, the young Kethavar engineer, crawling through irradiated maintenance tunnels to restore power to critical life support systems. Tor and Vel, working tirelessly to coordinate refugee movements while serving as living proof that predator species could be trusted allies. Pix, barely 13 but already demonstrating medical intuition that had saved hundreds of lives that conventional triage would have missed. And through it all, the humans and Kethvar had worked as a seamless unit, their bond so complete that many of the colonists had initially assumed they were looking at a single, hybrid species. Honorable Council members, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I stand before you today not as a human captain, but as a member of a family that transcends species boundaries. What we accomplished at Kepler 442b wasn't a human achievement or a Kethvar achievement. It was a family achievement. Ambassador Threx of the Regelian Confederation leaned forward in his hovering chair. Captain Chen, your rescue operation was indeed impressive, but many question whether your unusual family structure represents a viable model for interspecies relations or merely an interesting anomaly. Before Marcus could respond, Zarak stepped forward. Now recognized as a full adult by both human and Kethvar law, he wore the insignia of a Federation officer with pride. Ambassador Threx, Zarak said, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance that had become his signature. With respect, we are not an anomaly. We are the future. A murmur ran through the assembly. The young Kethvar's confidence was striking, but more than that, his words carried the weight of lived experience. For 7 years I have lived among humans. I have learned their customs, their values, their ways of thinking. But I have not stopped being Kethvar. If anything, I have become more myself than I ever could have been within the limitations of a single-species society. Nyx joined her brother at the podium. The engineering solutions we developed for the colony rescue drew on both human innovation and Kethvar intuition. Neither species could have achieved those results alone, but together, we created technologies that are already being adopted throughout the Federation. Tor and Vel stepped forward together, their synchronized movement a testament to the deep bond they'd maintained. Despite their different developmental paths, we have served as diplomatic liaisons for first contact situations with 17 different species, Tor said. Our success rate is 97%, Vel continued, compared to the Federation average of 63%. The difference, they said in unison, is that we understand what it means to be different and still belong to the same family. Finally, Pix approached the microphone. Despite her youth, she commanded attention in a way that made hardened diplomats lean forward to listen. Honorable Council members, she began, her young voice clear and strong. You ask whether our family is a model or an anomaly, but you're asking the wrong question. She paused, looking around the vast chamber with those enormous orange eyes that had seen so much in her short life. The right question is, why are we still unusual? Why in a galaxy of thousands of species are mixed families like ours still rare? The answer isn't biology or psychology or even law. The answer is fear. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the usually restless Altarian delegation had stopped their constant chittering to listen. Fear of losing identity. Fear of change. Fear of discovering that the boundaries we've built between species are less real than we thought. But fear is a choice, and so is family. Dr. Sarah Kim moved to stand beside the children she'd helped raise. Council members, I've spent 7 years studying the psychological and physiological effects of interspecies bonding. What we've learned challenges everything we thought we knew about the limits of social adaptation. She gestured to the data display that materialized above the podium. Empathic abilities in the Kethvar children have developed decades ahead of schedule. Problem-solving capabilities in both species have increased measurably. Most remarkably, we've documented the emergence of entirely new forms of cooperative behavior that neither species exhibits in isolation. But the most significant finding, Sarah continued, is that these adaptations are being passed to the next generation. The human children born on our ship are developing enhanced spatial reasoning abilities, typically associated with Kethvar genetics. The Kethvar children are demonstrating improved linguistic processing that mirrors human neural patterns. Ambassador Threx's eye stalks twitched with interest. You're suggesting that interspecies families can drive evolutionary adaptation? I'm not suggesting it, Sarah replied firmly. I'm documenting it. Evolution doesn't stop at species boundaries when those boundaries become artificial. Elder Vorthak of the Kethvar delegation rose from his seat. The ancient alien had initially opposed the children's adoption, but his presence here suggested a change of heart. 7 years ago, Vorthak said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. I believed these human-raised children would lose their essential Kethvar nature. I was wrong. They have not lost their nature. They have expanded it. They are more than Kethvar. They are also more than human. They are something new. He turned to address Marcus directly. Captain Chen, your family has taught my people something we thought we already knew. That strength comes not from purity, but from the courage to grow beyond what we were. The formal vote, when it came, was unanimous. The Galactic Council officially recognized mixed-species families as a legitimate social structure, with all the legal protections and benefits that entailed. More importantly, they established the Chen-Kethvar integration protocols as a model for other families seeking to cross species boundaries. But for Marcus, watching his children, human and Kethvar alike, celebrate their victory, the real triumph wasn't legal or political. It was seeing Pix laugh at one of Miguel's jokes while simultaneously translating it for a Kethvar journalist. It was watching Zrak and Nix collaborate on a technical explanation for a group of human engineers. It was witnessing Tor and Vel seamlessly switch between human and Kethvar cultural modes as they worked the crowd of diplomats. They had become exactly what he'd hoped for all those years ago when he'd made the decision to take in 5 frightened orphans. Proof that family wasn't about biology or species or even planet of origin. Family was about the choice to care for each other, to grow together, and to face the universe as a united force. As they prepared to leave the council chambers, Pix tugged at Marcus's sleeve. Dad, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. Marcus knelt down to her level, though she was growing tall enough that the gesture wasn't as necessary as it used to be. What is it, sweetheart? I've been sensing something new in the past few months. There are other families like ours forming throughout the galaxy. Mixed families. Human Altarian, Kethvar Rigelian. Even some 3-species groups. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. That's wonderful, Pix. She smiled, that radiant expression that had gotten them through so many difficult times. We started something, didn't we? Marcus looked around at his family. Sarah adjusting Nix's ceremonial sash. Miguel arguing good-naturedly with Tor about engineering principles. Zrak and Vel deep in conversation with a group of young diplomats who hung on their every word. No, little one, he said softly. We didn't start something. We became something, and now the galaxy gets to see what that looks like. As the Good Samaritan departed Haven Station for their next mission, Marcus stood on the bridge surrounded by the best crew he'd ever served with. They were heading for the Andromeda Relay Station, where reports indicated several mixed families were struggling with integration challenges. It looked like they had a lot of work to do. But then again, family was always a work in progress. And the Chen family, all 28 members across 2 species and counting, was just getting started.